In 1941, 239 tanks were advancing through Soviet territory. The Germans did not expect any major obstacles ahead. However, a single Soviet KV-2 tank was positioned at a strategic point. When the first German vehicles approached, the KV-2 opened fire on the Panzer III and Panzer 35T. The thick frontal armor of the KV-2 resisted direct hits. Several enemy tanks were damaged or destroyed before they could get close enough to penetrate its armor. The Soviet tank took advantage of its elevated position and the long range of its cannon to fire repeatedly, maintaining a safe zone around itself. The KV-2 was neither fast nor maneuverable. Its limited engine power and extreme weight made movement difficult, especially on uneven terrain. Even so, the tank was strategically placed to protect a critical route that the 6th Division needed to cross. The Soviet objective was simple: delay the German advance while additional forces regrouped. The commanders of the 6th Panzer Division quickly realized that their advance was blocked. Initial attempts to flank the KV-2 were stopped by marshy terrain and the tank's defensive position. Tanks that approached head-on were hit by its 152mm cannon, while machine gun and light artillery fire failed to penetrate its armor. German engineers and tank crews tried to coordinate combined attacks using Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks to focus their fire. Each attempt failed. The frontal armor absorbed the impacts, while the tall turret allowed the KV-2 to continue firing without exposing significant weak points. Some vehicles were damaged, others became stuck in the rough terrain, creating additional blockages along the route. Meanwhile, the KV-2's 5-man crew maintained a steady rate of fire. Each shot was calculated. Priority targets included isolated tanks or small groups attempting to flank the position. The rate of fire was not high. Reloading the gun took time, but the defensive position minimized risks during the process. Facing the KV-2's resistance, German commanders brought in heavy artillery. Howitzers and anti-tank guns were positioned at safe distances, but the uneven ground reduced their effectiveness. Many shells exploded without causing significant damage to the Soviet tank's armor. Engineers attempted more aggressive tactics. Demolition charges, sabotage equipment, and even attempts to attack the tank's rear were used, but the KV-2 remained stationary and fully functional. Its turret rotated slowly, yet the 152mm cannon struck every vehicle that got close, destroying or damaging Panzer III and Panzer 35 tanks. While the Germans spent valuable time trying to neutralize the tank, Soviet units took advantage of the delay. Nearby infantry and artillery regrouped and strengthened the area. Every minute that the KV-2 remained operational increased Soviet resistance in the region. The tank also served as a reference point for Soviet command. The KV-2's positioning and firing influenced German decisions, forcing them to redirect troops and vehicles to avoid further losses. The cumulative effect was a strategic blockade, both physical and operational, slowing the advance of hundreds of tanks and mechanized troops. The Germans then decided to coordinate a combined assault involving heavy artillery, infantry, and support tanks. Attempts to encircle the KV-2 began, but the terrain made coordination difficult. Marshes, trenches, and the tank's elevated position restricted the movement of the 6th Panzer Division. Tanks that tried to approach were destroyed before reaching a safe distance. The KV-2 fired high-caliber shells, destroying or disabling isolated vehicles. The turret rotated slowly, but with enough precision to keep any advance under control. The frontal armor withstood direct hits from Panzer III and Panzer 35T guns, forcing the Germans to seek indirect approaches. Attempts to plant explosive charges under the KV-2 failed or took hours to execute. The tank remained operational while the German division suffered casualties and delays. Every minute spent facing that lone position increased the Soviet tactical advantage in the area. The immediate result was the blockage of a vital route. The 6th Panzer Division could not advance without neutralizing the KV-2, and any alternative maneuver required time-consuming detours. The presence of a single vehicle altered the dynamic of hundreds of tanks and thousands of soldiers, turning an isolated confrontation into a logistical and operational problem. With the KV-2 still active, the 6th Panzer Division began reorganizing its forces. Tank columns split up in an attempt to flank the obstacle, but the terrain remained unfavorable. Narrow roads and mud made fast movements impossible and forced the Germans to slow their advance. Concentrated attacks were impossible without exposing units to precise fire from the KV-2. The turret kept turning, covering all approach angles. Every attempt to surround or attack directly was frustrated, causing tank losses, prolonged fighting, and crew exhaustion. Meanwhile, the Soviet crew took advantage of the delay. Ammunition reloading, quick maintenance, and positional adjustments were carried out safely since the Germans couldn't get close enough. Each successful shot from the KV-2 increased the psychological pressure on German commanders, who had to constantly revise their plans. Faced with the persistent blockade, German commanders sent specialized engineering teams. Their objective was to destroy the KV-2 with demolition charges or immobilize it using mines and explosives. However, the approach required crossing open terrain under direct fire from the 152mm cannon. The first attempts failed. Explosives placed from a distance could not penetrate the armor, and any manual approach exposed the engineers to immediate fire. The KV-2 didn't need to move to maintain the blockade. Its position already covered all possible attack routes. Meanwhile, German tanks retreated to reorganize and prevent further losses. Every second spent trying to neutralize the KV-2 delayed the division's overall advance, creating congestion and disrupting coordination with other panzer units. The cumulative effect was clear. A single Soviet tank had paralyzed hundreds of vehicles and thousands of soldiers. The KV-2 crew maintained constant vigilance, firing only when necessary, but maintaining total control over the situation. The prolonged blockade forced German commanders to consider risky alternatives, including limited airstrikes, heavy artillery repositioning, and even partial front-line reorganization, all because of a single tank that remained operational and impenetrable. The KV-2's blockade had immediate effects on the 6th Panzer Division's strategy. Remaining units had to reroute entire columns to avoid the tank, causing significant delays. Each alternate path required extra coordination and increased exposure to Soviet ambushes or traps. German commanders began recalculating priorities. Planned attacks on further defensive positions were postponed, and resources previously allocated to offensive operations were diverted to neutralize or bypass the KV-2. This operational adjustment consumed crucial hours, enough time for Soviet forces to regroup and reinforce nearby sectors. At the same time, the KV-2 crew maintained constant vigilance and seized every firing opportunity. The tank's efficiency lay not only in its armor and cannon, but also in the crew's discipline in target selection and area control. The psychological effect on German operators was evident. Losses and prolonged the stalemate. After hours of deadlock, German commanders intensified their efforts. Support tanks and heavy artillery were positioned nearby to try to neutralize the KV-2 from a distance. Concentrated bombardments were carried out, but the thick armor resisted direct hits from medium-caliber guns. Engineering teams continued working under constant fire, attempting to mine or immobilize the tank. Every approach was risky, and personnel losses mounted as German pressure increased. The KV-2 remained functional, moving only when necessary to maintain coverage over the division's main routes. The tank's continued presence prevented the 6th Panzer Division from consolidating advances or reorganizing formations. Every movement had to be carefully calculated, yet was still exposed to precise KV-2 fire. Communications within the division revealed growing concern, as the delay affected not only this front, but the entire German operational plan. Finally, After nearly 2 days of blockade, German engineers and artillery managed to immobilize the KV-2. A concentrated bombardment by heavy artillery and explosive charges placed at strategic points damaged the tracks and turret, rendering the tank unable to move or fire. Even so, the impact was already achieved. The 6th Panzer Division had spent precious hours trying to neutralize a single threat, delaying the entire planned advance. Tank columns had to retreat or redraw routes. Coordination between units was disrupted, and the pace of the offensive was significantly reduced. The KV-2, though physically neutralized, had fulfilled its strategic role. A single tank managed to hold back hundreds of vehicles and thousands of enemy soldiers, forcing them to waste resources and time that could have been used elsewhere in the offensive. The blockade proved that the effectiveness of a combat vehicle is not measured only by its firepower or armor, but also by its position, crew discipline, and proper tactical use. The delay caused by the KV-2 changed the dynamics of the entire operation, forcing adjustments throughout the German division's command structure. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to the War Archive.